Let's create some tables. We've already designed our database and constructed a logical model diagram that includes all of the information that we'll need in order to actually write the code that creates our database. By now, you should have already created a database to work in or are already connected to the database that you're going to work in. See the other videos in the series for ways to do that. And as a reminder, we're going to use SQL Server, so our SQL Server syntax may vary a little bit from some of the others, MySQL, Oracle, etc. So our diagram is as follows, and you can find a link to this down in the doobly-doo here, and also on the GitHub repository, which is also linked in the doobly-doo. But this is our basic diagram that we're going to work from. Just to recap, we have a user, a set of users that can create optionally many posts. Each of those posts can have a specific category or not. That's up to the user's discretion. Those categories can be selected from a predefined list of categories. That's why we created a new table, or we're going to create a new table for it. And users connect to one another via a contact list request mechanism. It will be implemented through the contact list table. So that's the basics of our diagram. So I'm going to remove it from the screen just to maximize the real estate so you can actually see the code as I type. But I would strongly recommend grabbing yourself a copy of this just so you can follow along. As another note, the code for this video will be available in the GitHub repository, so please feel free to grab it from there and try it out for yourself. Okay. Our first table, we're going to start with our simple table. So this is the create table mechanic, and we're going to keep it rather simple for the purposes of this video. We're going to create our table, and we're going to add columns to that table. Adding constraints will be in a future installment. Also, creating tables with constraints baked into that command will be in a future installment. We're kind of building on this stepwise here. Okay, so the first table I'm going to create is the post category table. I chose that just because it's one of the simpler tables, just so you can get a feel for what the syntax is. So here I am. I'm in a blank SQL file, and I'm going to start by saying create table. So that's the basic starting syntax for when you want to actually create a table. And the next bit is we have to give our table a name. And from our diagram, we're going to take it from the table name in our version. It's in gray at the top of the box. It may appear slightly different depending on which tool you use to diagram it, or it may be just coming off the top of your head. In our case, we want post category. Once I've got the table, now I have to give it a list of columns that are inside that table. So if you envision a table as like a single spreadsheet, this is the sheet. What do you want at the top of every column? I'm going to do a new line, and I like to tab things in. This is my convention. I like to do this so that all of my code looks like it belongs together for some degree of belong together. But here we are. So we can start at the top of our list here, and I can start typing the column names, post category ID, and so I have the column name followed by the data type. And our diagram indicates that this has the identity property. This is a SQL Server type construct where we're telling SQL Server, please provide me a value for this. And the value it provides is the next in the series. So if you recall from the data types discussion, identity is a property of an integer that says that it starts at some seed, and by default it's 1, and as you add records to this table, it increases the number that it uses for this column. It also never reclaims it, which makes it really nice for a surrogate key, surrogate primary key. Okay. Our diagram, so just to kind of refamiliarize you with the nomenclature used in our diagram, or rather the convention used in this diagramming, the font on this is boldface. So that tells me as a programmer that this is a required attribute. Full disclosure, if you implement this as a primary key, the primary key aspect of it will take care of this, but let's be complete for right now and say not null. So this is the first of the types of constraints that we're going to deal with. It's the simplest, I believe, of our constraints, where we're saying that this value cannot be null. Thankfully for us, the system's going to provide a value for us every time, so we don't have to necessarily worry about that, but it does enforce it so that we can't change it later on. And then we do a new line. I like to put my commas at the beginning of lines. Just helps with when I have to shuffle things around, copying, pasting code. That's my convention. You could also put the comma at the end of the preceding line. So the line, your comma could go at the end of line 2. So don't get too hung up on where that comma is. Just make sure that there is a comma there. So my next column is post category text. And this is a variable character or varchar of 50. Again, this is bold-faced on the page, so I want to make sure that I indicate that it cannot be null, not null. And we have one left, comma, and this is the post category description. These are rather long column names, but I think for the purposes of conceptualizing what's going on here, it's kind of important that they are fully dressed like this. Now this is a variable character of 200. And just to recap, the number in parentheses of a varchar data type indicate the maximum number of characters allowed in that column. Because it is a varchar, or variable character, it will be alphanumeric text up to, in this case, 200 characters long, and on disk, it will only allocate enough space to store exactly what you put in. So if our post category description is very short, maybe only 10 characters long, on disk it will only take up 10 characters worth of space. Contrast that to just a regular character data type that will actually fully will fill that entire space with spaces. You'll have trailing spaces after your actual data, and so it's really up to you and your particular needs as to which one you use. Again, more on that in the data types discussion. And then I'm done, so I close my parentheses. So you'll see that within the parentheses on at the end of line 1 and the beginning of line 5, I have a comma-separated list of column names followed by data types. I can say go. And it's important to point out that I've just typed this code. That doesn't mean that I've impacted my table in any way. In fact, if I skip over to my Explorer details and I refresh my tables, you can see that I have no actual user-defined tables here. So just by typing the code, that didn't do anything. However, I can highlight the code that I just wrote and execute it, and it tells me it completed successfully. Now that has actually set up the structure, the metadata, and all of the components and constraints that I've defined within that create table block that are going to house the data for post categories. And again, if I refresh my post explorer or my object explorer details, you can now see that post category there. An important point to note, once you've created a table, you cannot create it again unless you first drop it. Covered in a separate video, but if I try to run this again, I get this error message that there's already an object named that. So if you get this message, that means that you've already created the table and therefore cannot run this create table again. You have to go to either drop it first or you have to use an alter table. So let's take a slightly longer or more involved table. Let's do the post. So I'm going to, again, create table, begins the process here, and I can call it post. And now I'm going to put in parentheses a comma-separated list of all of the all of the columns that I want. So I start with my post ID, again, int. So this is the data type, integer is the data type. Identity is a property of that integer. And this is boldface, so I want it to be not null. And I can continue, post text. Our posts are going to be up to 240 characters long, so let's make sure we have enough space for all of that. And in order to make a post, you have to actually provide some text. So we're not going to allow any posts to go into our database that don't have any text, right? We don't want any blank posts, so we'll enforce the not null constraint on it. The next is the first in a couple instances of this. We're going to actually timestamp when this happens. So we're not going to actually put the constraint on right now, but we're going to set up the column to hold this timestamp. So I'm going to say post timestamp, and this is going to be a date time. And just a quick recap of date time from the data types discussion. A date time will hold both the date and the time. So we want the date time because both of components of that are important to us. This is also not null. And we continue. So the next two are our foreign keys. The first of which is an int. And you'll notice, though, that I want this data type to be the same as the primary key in the table to which it's related, to which it references. However, I don't use the identity property here because I don't want this to automatically assign a number here. I want to actually pick what the number is when I put it here. The identity property on the primary key of the user table will determine what the user's ID is, so I'm going to leave this as just int. And it's boldface, so it's not null. And our very last column is another foreign key, post to post category ID. And it is an integer. Now you'll notice that this is not boldface, and this is because we've said that picking a category for a post is an optional thing. So we don't want to force the user to categorize their post in any way. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to leave it just like this. We're not going to indicate a not null here, and we're instead going to close our parentheses. And I can say go. Okay? So again, I have to run this code. You'll see I'm highlighting exactly the code that I want to run, and I click execute. And the command completed successfully. And just like before, if I try to run this again, it will not let me recreate that table. So if you want to take a look at what you just made in the database, you can run this simple pair of select statements. So if you type select star from post category and select star from post, you run those together, you can see that we have the tables. I have the column headings from our category. That's based on what we typed in the create table for category, post category, and we have the column headings that we used for post. We have not added data yet. That comes later. So we do not have any data to see, but in our results panel, you can definitely tell that our tables are set up. So next, we're going to have to go through and add our constraints to this so that we can do some more interesting things with our database.